Senator Joyal. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Bill S-202 be read a second time. It is moved by the Honourable Senator Joyal, seconded by the Honourable Senator Cordy, that this bill be read a second time. Debate. On debate, Senator Joyal. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honourable Senators?
To stand up in this chamber, and I would be remiss if I would not speak at second reading, even though I know it's late, it's Thursday afternoon. But once I will have gone through the door, once we will have adjourned today, it will be over. And I, especially since the motion of Senator Mitchell has just been adopted, and I am really concerned that this debate take place in this chamber. And as a matter of fact, I think it is Bill 202 is quite an eloquent illustration of what we can do in this chamber as individual senator. You will remember, honourable senators, that I introduced that bill, Bill S-202, an act to amend the criminal code, conversion therapy. I introduced it last spring, and I had the opportunity on May 7th to go at length to explain the purpose and the substance of the bill. So since it is essentially the same bill, I will seek leave from you so that the speech I made in the 7th of May be reprinted on the speech, on the answer of today's proceedings, so that I could address you with what I think has happened since we first approached this bill and you first heard me on the 7th of May. So maybe, Madam Speaker, if you would want to confirm that this is the will of the House, so that it be.
Is leave given? Agreed.
Thank you, honourable senators. So you will certainly remember then that the purpose of this bill, as it is well spelled in its summary, is to make an offence to advertise conversion therapy services for consideration and to obtain a financial or other material benefit for the provision of conversion therapy to a person under the age of 18. And I stress under the age of 18. This bill aims to protect, in fact, the youth. What did happen since we first had the opportunity to debate this issue? Well, there has been an election campaign, and during that campaign, different parties took stand on this issue. And I want to remind honourable senators that, for instance, the Liberal Party had this commitment in its platform, and I quote, "Conversion therapy is a scientifically discredited practice that targets vulnerable LGBTQ2 Canadians in an attempt to change their sexual orientation or gender identity. There is international consensus in the medical community that conversion therapy is not founded in science and does not work." And the platform continues. To ensure that no one is subjected to this practice, we will move forward on our promise to work with provinces and territories to end conversion therapy in Canada, including making amendments to the criminal code that will prohibit this harmful and scientifically disproven practice, especially against minors. End of quote. So in other words, what I want to illustrate is that when we start a debate here, we introduce a private member bill, we debate it, it has an impact on the government of Canada of the day, whatever is the government. So I invite you, honourable senators, to really consider introducing private member bills. You will have an impact on the government of Canada. Maybe not immediately, maybe not the next day, and our colleague Senator Miville Deschênes paid tribute to former Senator Pratt. And Senator Pratt was feeling impatient sometimes that his amendments were not all accepted by the government, that in sometimes he thought that it was a loss of time, but you have to leave society absorb changes that open avenues in wider direction. And that's the most positive way I can put it, in easy terms for any one of you to try to reflect upon your privilege. It's the most important privilege. You can initiate legislation. There are very, very few Canadians who can do that. And by initiating this debate on conversion therapy, while the Attorney General and Minister of Justice, Mr. Lametti, last spring had commented on the petition that was tabled in the House of Commons, but in fact sent back the issue to the provinces. Well, now we have a commitment of the government to move in that direction. And the government was not the only party to move in that direction. I can quote the platform of the NDP, and let me quote it. Quote, "When it comes to sexual orientation and gender expression, damaging practices such as so-called conversion therapy have no place in Canada. We will develop a national action plan to ban conversion therapy for minors in Canada and work with provinces and territories to support eliminating this practice in all parts of the country." So hence, another party. So you are probably better skilled in arithmetic than myself, but if you had the 157 votes of the government plus the 24 of the NDP, hence, there is a majority. But it's not the only attention that I had over what happened during the campaign. I can quote from former leader of the Conservative Party, and I was very pleased to read in the Global News report, and I can give the day of it. It was the, let me find it in my notes, it was in July, 17th of July, 15th of July, should I say, and I quote former leader of the Conservative Party, who stated the following, quote, "We will always stand up for the rights of LGBTQ individuals and protect their rights, and we are opposed to any type of practice that would forcibly attempt to change someone's sexual orientation," end of quote. I was the happiest man on earth when I read that, because I said, here is a consensus that has emerged from that debate. And I think that this bill is needed today, and I'll tell you why. You were all here last Thursday to listen to the throne speech, and I was all ears to try to find in the throne speech a passage or a statement that would refer to the commitment of the government on its platforms. And here is what I heard, and I read it from what Her Excellency, the Governor General, read in the throne of Her Majesties. And I quote, "Every one of them expects their parliamentarians to get to work and deliver on a plan that moves our country forward for all Canadians, including women, members of visible and linguistic minorities, people with disabilities, and members of the LGBTQ2 communities." End of quote. Vague, good intention, but not specific. So hence, the need to introduce this bill, and that's why I've introduced it at the beginning of the week, because I said maybe the government needs a little support. Maybe the Senate should continue to lead the way in that direction. And I think that there is, from what I have read to you from the various sources, and no, I would certainly want to say to the leader of the opposition that no Canadian doubt that Mr. Scheer is an honest person, and he speaks his values. And nobody in Canada should have to bear any additional weight because he or she speaks his religious or her religious values. And that, I think, Mr. Senator Platt, as somebody who has some deep commitment to human rights, I think we have to be very cautious in Canada if we embark onto that way in the political debate. This country is being diversified on religious ground. And if we start to question the reliability of a person on his or her religious moral values, I think we are going in very wrong directions. And that's why when I read those comments from Mr. Scheer last summer, I said he's an honest man. He understands that there is a distinction between your own belief and where is the Canadian society in terms of respect of individual rights. And I took his word as a true commitment when he stated that last summer. And as much as he would be still the leader of the Tory party in the other place, I would still commit to respect his commitment, and I will take his words for what they are. And I think that we should remind this, because what we've seen today, to me, is not a very happy day for Canada. So, honorable senators, I think that when we look into this bill, be very mindful that it doesn't prevent somebody from believing what he or she believes in his true moral and religious commitment. It doesn't impose anything on anyone. It leaves anyone to choose whoever, whatever, in which direction the person wants to organize his or her life. But I think that this therapy, which has been scientifically disproved, that nobody can come forward and establish that it is effective. Not only that, but it is damageable to the physical and integrity of a person. We are at the point where we need to prohibit that, and the bill seeks to prohibit the advertising of it and aim to prohibit to draw any material or any kind of benefit for the practice of it. So, honorable senators, I commend this bill to your attention. I hope and other senators will carry the debate on this. Let's keep the debate on. You might see what we have lived in the previous parliament. I introduced a bill to recognize Aboriginal languages, and it took 3 years to the government to come forward with finally a bill that we were so proud, all of us, to all adopt last June. And I hope that this bill will find its way in government's agenda. I hope the government will come forward with a bill. We will see what will happen in the other place, and we will have a template to evaluate the government bill, to study the government bill with this proposal I am sharing with you today. So this is typical Senate at its best, honorable senators, because we act in a way to open evolution, direction, in the full respects of any Canadian's belief. And I think that this bill, honorable senators, should be carried on among you. That's more or less what my gift to you in terms of human rights. And I hope that you will take pride to continue that debate and to study any private members' bill that senators, table, because it's the way that Canada evolves. And that's the power that you have. You have the power in your hands to have this great country to evolve in the right direction. Thank you, honorable senators.
Would the senator take a question? Do I have enough time, Madam Speaker? Yes, Senator Cormier. Honorable colleague, thank you for this bill. It shows once again your great sensitivity and interest towards human rights. Thank you for tabling this critical bill. And I can assure you that you can count on me to take up the torch. I would like to ask you a question about the scope of this bill. And also, I would just like before you leave to take this opportunity to ask you a question. This bill seeks to protect people of under 18 who are considered more vulnerable, perhaps than others, in Canadian society. If youth are considered to be part of a vulnerable population in Canada, well, we must never forget that there are also other vulnerable populations. For example, people with mental health problems or people with psychological or emotional difficulties. During our discussions on this piece of legislation, should we perhaps consider, and I ask the question without perhaps taking into account all the repercussions on the criminal code, but should we perhaps consider whether it would be a good idea to extend the scope of this bill to other vulnerable populations? Thank you very much, Senator Cormier. That's an important question. This piece of legislation seeks to strike a balance between, on the one hand, as you mentioned, the vulnerable situation of youth under 18, or the vulnerable state of people who perhaps for other reasons could be vulnerable. Someone in a vulnerable situation for any reason. Now, in the context of this bill, as I designed it, I did so in the hope that it was as likely as possible to survive a legal challenge on the basis of personal conviction. And as you know, several provinces have already legislated to ensure that professional colleges of physicians, psychologists, and psychiatrists not practice this so-called therapy, which is not scientifically shown to be effective. On the contrary, it is extremely harmful. So yes. And we saw this, as I mentioned, in the Liberal and NDP platforms. And Mr. Scheer mentioned that he was open to considering the government bill in the context of its extension to other categories of persons who might also be vulnerable. That is the debate that could potentially occur in committee. Representatives of the various professions involved could appear. Provincial representatives who will have to play an active role in forbidding this practice. We could also hear from other groups. Perhaps other groups that believe this practice should be permitted. Different opinions are allowed, but the goal of the work on committee, our committee, or I should say your committee now, the Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee, given that this is an amendment to the Criminal Code, to draw up the list of expert witnesses who might appear to determine whether this bill could constitutionally be extended to other vulnerable groups without in any way violating individuals' fundamental right to make their own choices. And in the text of the bill,
does not include a surgical sex change or any related service. En français, il est entendu que la présente définition ne vise pas le changement.
For greater certainty, this definition does not include a surgical sex change or any related service. There was a debate on the matter of gender identity in this chamber, as you know.
Fine-tune, c'est-à-dire qu'il faut
we must show great thoughtfulness when we legislate on a question like this one, because it touches on other freedoms. We must make sure that by protecting one group, we do not intentionally or unintentionally reduce the rights of others to make their own choices. And that is why, Senator Cormier, I would suggest that this bill be referred to the Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee in order to better determine its parameters. And that way, this could help the government ultimately decide what type of legislation would be appropriate if it decides to follow through on its platform commitment. But since the government is in a minority situation, and here I'm looking at political aspects of the situation, one might think that the government might have other priorities to get adopted with the support of the opposition parties. But so I think that together here in the Senate, we can pave the way towards an eventual government bill.
Sen-
Collègues, je propose l'ajournement du débat en mon nom.
I move